The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Hello, and let me welcome you to the People's View. And this is our legislative issue where the three of us will be talking about different legislative issues. And we have Bill Ohm, who was on the House Human Services Committee.
Ways and Means.
Ways and Means Committee, excuse me. I was thinking of Don.
Yeah,
anyway, Ways and Means, and former Alderman, Dave Schoeneman. So, Bill, do you want to start off with an issue you were talking about?
Yeah, thanks, Carl. I've got my red jacket on today because I think we're going to see a lot of red ink came out of the budgets that the House Finance is working on. And associated with the red ink will be the new taxes to pay for the excessive spending. So I want to talk about specifically one bill that is coming up in finance and had already passed through my former committee, Ways and Means, which is House Bill 686. This is a new tax. It's a capital gains tax. It's a tax that particularly hits people who are seniors. It hits anybody who's built up a nest egg. It hits anybody who's trying to prepare for inflation down the road. So what is a capital gains tax? Well, let's say you bought some stocks and you want to keep them for 20 years because, prices are going to go up, there's going to be inflation. So I'd like to at least keep up with inflation. I might get some dividends for income, but at the end of 20 years, it might double, it might triple. My expenses might be doubling or tripling, so at least I'm made whole if I've had a capital gains and I could sell that stock and live off of it for my retirement. However, under this House Bill 686, that money will now be taxable at a 5% rate. So after you've paid your money after tax to buy your stocks and you sell it, you're going to pay tax again on the inflation hedge that you thought you would use to keep yourself whole. Now, it's being wrapped up as a benefit to the public. Surprise, surprise. And the benefit is that they will put about $84 million from this new tax into cities and towns for the purpose of local aid. And so the theory is, well, we're going to send $84 million to cities and towns, but they're not going to spend it. They're going to use that to cut property taxes.
And they can't put it, they don't say that they have any kind of a tag they put on it that says they have to do that.
No. We're just going to... So what does that mean? Well, for education, it's always a contentious issue. There's more money that the school board wants than the city can provide, that the state can provide. And there's tough negotiations on salaries and benefits and hiring. So what if $84 million just popped out of the sky? What's going to happen to these negotiations now? Are they going to be tough and try to keep the pay and compensation in balance, or are they just going to say, well, look, we just got some extra money, so it's okay. We'll give you whatever increase in COLAs you want. It's okay. And we don't have to raise taxes because this money is found money.
Right. Well, you can see that here in Nashua already. You have the Board of Education looking at an extra percent, I guess it is, over what the mayor has said that they can have.
And that happened every single year.
Yeah.
They always wanted more.
Yeah. And
I think that taxpayers, I hope our viewers will hold people accountable and say, what are we getting for this money? Our enrollment goes down year after year after year. And the budget for the schools goes up and up and up year after year. And I think that the unions, the school employees, see a very compliant Board of Aldermen, very willing to spend this money. And I can just imagine what the pressure is going to be like on those compliant aldermen if suddenly it's announced in the paper that Nashua has all this extra money. The question is, how long will the extra money last? When there's a capital gains tax, do people stick around and willingly pay it? Or do maybe they say, Florida might be a better deal after all? Because this tax, there's already a federal capital gains tax. It's 20%. And so this is 5% on top of that. So it goes from 20 to 25. There are a number of states like New Hampshire that have had no tax on that capital gains. And so the total amount someone would pay would be 20%. It would be all to federal. Other states have added up to 5%. And maybe some have gone more than 5%. So our ranking out of all the 50 states was actually pretty low. It has been pretty low because we only have the federal. We don't have a state component on top of that. But if we do this 5%, we go from being on the very low end, an attractive state for taxes, to the high end, and we offer a disincentive for living in New Hampshire. And it's not good policy.
No, it's also complicated by the federal tax code reforms. Because now there's a $10,000 cap on deductions for state and local taxes. So if you have a substantial capital gains, let's say you bought a piece of property and you rented that out, then you sold that home for a nice profit as part of your retirement assets, you're going to easily hit that 10%. 10%. It's $10,000. If you sell for a $100,000 profit after, say, 15 years, $90,000 that's going to be taxable.
Right. That's hard. And we've seen what's happened in New York State recently, because New York State, of course, had very high income tax, and the $10,000 limit affected a lot of people there because they were used to paying way more than that in state taxes. Some people were. And so they could take it off their federal, and it all worked out in the wash. But it's not working out in the wash anymore because with that $10,000 limit, now those folks who are paying much higher New York State taxes, as an example, but we've seen in the news recently, are also going to be saddled with a higher federal tax because they can't deduct as much of their state tax towards their federal. And what's happening in New York State is people are leaving. And Governor Cuomo was speaking on it recently, and he said, I think maybe he was talking to people in his own party, he said, look, we said tax the rich, tax the rich, tax the rich. And that's what we've done.
So where's
God
the rich?
forbid that they should leave, but they're leaving.
Right.
So, in fact, New York is cracking down, trying to audit these people who are leaving because they're in the high income brackets, and New York revenues are suffering as a result.
They're trying to prove that they're not leaving. They're really only visiting down there. But that doesn't hold.
Right.
That happened with New Jersey a couple of years ago when they upped their tax. I mean, that started out as a 1% thing, and now it's well over 10%, I believe.
Right. So anyone who is up in Concord and says, this is how much money we're going to make from this, is certainly doesn't know the future.
Right.
None of us knows the future. But we do know that when someone is faced with high tax burden and has a choice, and we all do have choices about where we're going to live, we can choose, just like people in New Jersey chose to leave, people in New York State chose to leave, people in New Hampshire who are in that bracket, who are really contributing a lot to the economy with their other spending, I'm sure, or the businesses that they run. If they were in that situation, they could pack up and go somewhere else. So to say that we're going to have this tax, you may have it for a year or two, but I think the expectation would be that if people are behaving as rational beings, which we are, that they're going to take whatever steps they can to mitigate that. And if there's other states that have a better program, I think we can see an exodus from New Hampshire towards those states.
And that exodus might take a couple of years to develop as people realize what's really going on. But the spending associated with that capital gains is immediate.
Right.
They're going to appropriate $84 million immediately up out of the budget before this money comes in down the road.
And it's irrevocable, really, because once you establish the pattern, especially if it's established in a pattern of salaries, well, now what are you going to do? Now you have to keep on making those payments. It's not like it's a one-time expense. Those monies aren't going to one-time expenses. They're going to annual expenses. And when that happens, then somehow we have to make that money up. And actually, Connecticut is a great example because Connecticut used to have only a property tax. And back in the 90s, they said, well, let's lower the property taxes, make things easier for people by imposing income tax and a sales tax. Maybe they did a capital gains thing too, I'm not sure. But what's happened with time is that those taxes maybe didn't generate the revenues they were expecting. Spending went up way faster, and so property taxes have come back up. And now Connecticut is one of the worst states from a tax burden to live in of any of the 50. And we don't want that to happen in New Hampshire. But it seems that the other side, do they want that to happen here? I don't understand.
Yeah.
Well, they seem to be very mixed up in a way in my mind because they've come in saying that all the stuff that was done 2 years ago where we started a good plan in reducing business taxes, business profit tax, and we even have some legislation proposed in this session where we were going to cut out the interest and dividends tax, which is just contrary to getting more money in. But
Right.
we were getting more money when we reduced the business taxes.
Yes.
And we were smart enough not to use it for things that were going to be repetitive. They were special. They the rainy day fund or building bridges or roads or whatever, separate projects that could go on individually. And now with what we had 4 years of experience of gaining more money than we had anticipated.
Right.
And we don't even want to let that go on.
Well, I think that would be a big, big mistake. And one of the things that I think the last session did, and if you look at various states or even the entire U.S. back in the day when the country was formed, I think that leaders looked at what is truly human nature. Are we entrepreneurial? Do we like to work hard? Do we like to trade our time, which is our own, for income, which should also be our own then. If we're spending our time gaining income, that time which is our own should really translate to income that is our own. And if we let people go down that road and exercise their entrepreneurial spirit and take risks, then we're going to see a growth in the economy. But when we start punishing investments in this case,
punishing success
with these taxes, what we're going to see is we're running contrary to human nature, and I think that we're going to see a resistance from it. We've always done best when we have taken stock of who we are and then built a system that takes advantage of who and what people can do. And what we can do is we can take risks, we can develop businesses, we can invest in our communities, and we see all this growth. And to the extent that we foster that investment, we're going to succeed. And to the extent, like this legislation, that we try to squash that entrepreneurial spirit, we're going to pay a price for it. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a very important point you're making, because it's two different approaches. One believes that the government can direct people and they can do a better job than the people themselves.
Right.
But the other says people are individuals. They all operate differently. They all should be rewarded for success, not for failure, and that's the way most of this works.
That's right. And we actually have very strong empirical evidence. Right. What you cited is the last couple of years, we've seen revenues increase as we decrease taxes and allowed people to keep more of what they earn.
Right.
We've seen revenues increase because there's an expansion. And we're going to see the opposite as soon as we start trying to crush that.
Even the taxes on the federal level that have been reduced are now actually showing up in increased pay for the individuals that are working businesses.
That's right.
And so how can we negate that, just throw that information away and say, no, we're doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong. You're making all this money. It's going to help.
That's right.
Yeah, well, part of the problem is the static model that our political opponents, the Democrats, like to use. And they say, well, if we increase taxes 5%, we'll get 5% more cash. And if we decrease taxes, we'll lose 5%. And as you pointed out, Carl, it's been the opposite, because we've cut business taxes and we've got more revenue, more dollars in-house.
Right. So the static approach is wrong.
Yeah, it's wrong. Because that's the model that's being used.
The economy is always moving. Always moving. Money can move from state to state, from country to country. People can move from state to state, country to country. And since it's so dynamic, all you can do is make a guess. But if you're going to increase taxes, your expectation should be that in the short run, you'll get more revenues. But in the longer run, the basis for that tax is going to shrink because that money will move elsewhere where there's a better deal. That money, I think, came to New Hampshire because New Hampshire had the good deal, and it's going to leave New Hampshire and go somewhere else. How loyal. I mean, people who live here, like us, we love New Hampshire. It's great. But at some point, you're going to say, you know what, Florida doesn't do that, and it's warmer down there.
And there are a few other states, too, that are benefiting by people moving south.
Yes.
But I don't know. I don't understand that, because there are a number of other pieces of legislature that are doing the same thing that we have to look out after. The ones that are on family leave. The legislation proposes all sorts of giveaways on that, not even listening to what the governor has, which is an insurance way of doing it. I'm not sure that's it's better than what's being proposed by other legislation, but I'm not sure family leave is a necessary thing that the state has to provide.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that too. I've read the articles talking about Vermont and New Hampshire, the two governors getting together to try to offer an insurance. But it's not just being offered, it's being provided for state employees. And I'm not sure, because where does that money come from? That's still a tax. That has to come
That
from
should have
us.
been negotiated too.
Right.
I mean,
It's a contract issue.
It's a contract issue.
Right.
And if you're giving a better benefit, then maybe you don't give as much in an hourly increase.
Well, yep.
You
There
know,
has to be some
and
kind of give and
there
take.
should be that. You know, that's the way you have. And there are a lot of people that don't need family leave because they have family to help out.
Right.
I know in my own case that a long time, over the last 20 years, that we needed help and we came together as a family and we helped out each one that had a problem. And, you know, you take care of the elderly.
Right.
You take care of the sick. You know, so you don't need insurance for some of that.
You know, I don't think you do either. I like to look at our own resources.
Yeah.
That's what our family does. My mom is getting up there a little bit, and she lives in Vermont. My sister took her back up there. She's not driving anymore, and I'm going to go and get her in a couple of weeks. So it's not right here in the neighborhood,
That's right.
but we're doing things that we have to, and we're adjusting our work schedules accordingly in order to accommodate this need that has arisen. And I think that's the better way to go. I think that's a better way to go. But the idea that the Democrats had proposed in the last term certainly wasn't going to be a good program. And the governor's proposal is somewhat better. We'll see. I would like to see an employee contribution. If someone's going to elect to get that coverage, they should have a deduction
not
on their
everybody,
paycheck to
and
pay
you
for
have
it.
your choice of what kind of coverage you want.
Sure.
Yeah, how comprehensive, how much you want to pay.
I mean, if you're 50 years old, you're not going to worry about having a baby,
Right.
generally.
Arkansas. We got a 2-year-old at home. 2-year-old at home.
I have a son, too.
But you're right. I think that the needs are different, and I think it's important to have choice in these things. What's interesting too is what the strategy is here, because they're going out to the public and saying, look at all this benefit you're going to get, and it's going to be paid for by somebody else. It's a bribe, essentially. Here's money for you. It's coming from those guys over there. Same thing with the Bill 686. I think that was the right number, 686. They're offering this money to cities and towns, and people are saying, well, I'm going to get some property tax relief from this. It's a great idea. It's a bribe. And it's smoke and mirrors. And these things don't work out the way they're advertised in the beginning, and there's never any accountability for it. And so I think what would happen here in both these cases is that it sounds great in the beginning, but we're going to pay a much bigger price for it later on down the line.
Well,
I concur. Well said, Dave. Carl.
what else did you have on your little want list?
Well, I was just thinking about the broader tax issues. You know, there's, as we talked about the business tax situation, we talked about it in one of our previous conversations, how the Democrats are proposing to stop the decrease in business taxes. And without getting into a lot of the specifics, I think it's important to talk about certainty.
Okay.
You know, businesses have more than just a...
They plan ahead a little bit.
Right. So
They have to.
Do I want to move to New Hampshire or not? Well, what's the climate in New Hampshire for taxes? And we had to set up a plan to go down on a slow but steady basis over a number of years. And now there's this talk, and hopefully not the action, and maybe the governor's veto that has to be in place that would keep that certainty so that the businesses who've decided to look seriously at New Hampshire or have actually gone to New Hampshire now have the deliverabilities that we've promised them of these tax cuts. It's really difficult to plan, and you would normally put your plans on hold if you saw, you know, a lot of ripples in the trends that are based on what your plans require.
I think that putting plans on hold would be a wise decision for a business these days. If I was in that situation,
Yeah.
especially since we see that it's a Democrat-controlled House, Democrat-controlled Senate, and I imagine as this bill makes its way through 686, it's going to head over to the Senate, and it's not going to be changed. It's going to be rubber stamped. All these votes, by the way, are all party line votes. All party line votes. So the only line of defense against any of this rests with one man. That's the governor. Governor Sununu. So anyone who's looking at, using the term you used, the climate, the tax climate in New Hampshire, is going to have to say, the only thing that's standing between me and a high tax burden is one man. I think Sununu will protect us, but what if he's not in office anymore? What's going to happen? So anyone who's kind of judging the overall trend cannot see good news in New Hampshire. I mean, I don't understand, unless I'm wrong. How am I wrong in that assessment?
It looks pretty accurate because there's also some undercurrents here about Governor Sununu, who's a very popular governor. And he's getting a lot of back pressure to not run for governor again in 2020 because they think he can beat Jeanne Shaheen in Senate.
I see.
There's a lot of national pressure leaning on Chris to say, look, you did a great job. We need you in Congress. And if that takes place, then it's going to be a more risky situation for the business community. So who's going to replace Chris? And does that person have the same motivation, drive to be pro-business than Chris Sununu has?
There's nobody that comes right to mind, although I imagine there is somebody that might be able to fill that. But I think we have to build up the fact that what we're seeing a good economy. We're seeing people actually coming into or staying here in New Hampshire, and we see more jobs being with this tax break. If you change it, you're not going to grow. You're not going to have more jobs.
We're not going to have it, but the other side seems to be bent on making these changes.
I thought we used to say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah. Well, the system is working well. I mean, we do have this growing economy here, and someone who's going to make an investment would have to say, well, if they know what you just shared, that Chris Sununu is perhaps being pressured to run against Jeanne Shaheen in 2020, then they have to wonder. Maybe they'll say, I'm not going to invest right now. I'm going to wait and see
if it declares,
see what happens in 2020, or let's see how 2019 goes locally. We have, of course, municipal elections coming up here too. Let's see how 2019 goes. Let's see what happens with 2020, at least with announcements. Let's see. So that expansion, the new jobs that were going to be created, that maybe we'll create them in Texas instead, or maybe we'll just hold off and not decide. So I think that we're going to see perhaps a stagnation in the growth that we've experienced as a result of efforts like this, because people do have choices. We are rational, and if someone is going to feel penalized for bringing business here, why would they do it? And that's what this amounts to.
Well, you're talking about local situations too. Maybe we ought to dive into some of the local budgets that we're going to be worrying about. I think you've read in the paper about what the Board of Education is looking at.
Yes.
An increase of almost 3% again, when the mayor wants to only hold it to a little over 2%.
Right.
And again, we're talking about not only taking care of adding more people when our student population is decreasing, but also adding overhead. I don't know if it's nice that you're going to have some teachers coming in, especially in our case where we have too many students that are English as a second language, and they need more teachers to handle that particular problem. But they're also putting in a couple of psychiatrists and everything.
That's
Now,
right.
I don't know what they're trying to do with psychiatrists. Are we trying to mold these people in a certain standard
maybe so.
format, or
Maybe so.
what?
I don't see
or we have a problem.
the same needs in other public schools,
Yeah.
namely the charter schools. I'm a strong advocate for the charter schools. As an alderman, I toured Academy for Science and Design, and I toured Micro Society Academy, and I went through plenty of the public schools here too, either tours just to see the school, or I was on this building committee, a joint special committee, a combination of aldermen and the school board members that would look at school projects. So I was involved in that. I was in the schools all the time. And in that experience, I became convinced. First off, I learned what charter schools were about, and I learned what our local public schools are about, regular public schools, and I became convinced that the charter school model is better all around. It produces a better result at a much lower cost. But it's a public school, and anyone who applies is going to be in a lottery to get in or not, based on nothing other than your number, pulling a name out of a hat.
Right.
So why is it that the charter schools don't seem to have these problems that the public schools have? Is it that the populations are different? To some degree, maybe, but we've heard stories of kids who are languishing in the public schools going to a charter school and thriving. I think it's a different approach, a different model, and one model is not succeeding, and the other model is succeeding in terms of both outcomes and cost. And when I hear that this local school board, or the school system, still needs more money, and we see what the performance really remains unchanged, it's still pretty low.
It's the lower half of the state.
It's a lower third. It's a bottom third in the state. So it's a lower half. You're right, but it's even lower than the lower half. It's down there. And I think that folks at home should be concerned. Now, I'm not saying that everyone suffers in the local schools, because there are some students who do very well there. And we've talked about it before, that not every educational system is right for everybody. But there's something going on in these local schools that seems to be fostering or exacerbating the problems that exist, because some of the kids that are able to get out of that and go elsewhere thrive. So it's not just the ESL, English Second Language population, or the immigrant population, which we heard all the time on the Board of Aldermen. We'd say, well, why are this performance? And then others would turn right away and start blaming low-income people or blaming immigrants for the school's performance. I think that schools really need to look internally. I can tell you that the charter schools, they do look internally all the time. That's part of what they have to do, because if someone's not in that seat, if they're not succeeding, they're not going to get their money. Whereas a public school, if they don't succeed, they still get money. So here we have enrollment going down, issues in the school, performance in the bottom third, and they still get more money. That would never happen in a charter school. So the model of the charter school, I think, forces administration in those schools to not get too top heavy, and forces teachers and administrators to look internally to see what can we do to make this work better, knowing that there's not necessarily more money to put a Band-Aid on a problem. Whereas I don't see any introspection. And anyone who's going to grow up and live in the world, and we're theoretically preparing our students to grow up and live in the world, introspection's a big part of that. We have to ask ourselves, is the path that I'm on going to lead me to success or lead me to failure as individuals? Is this job going to take me where I want to go? Is this lifestyle going to take me where I want to go? Is this move to this city or town or state going to take me where I want to go? That's all introspective. And I think that if we don't teach introspection by modeling it within a school department, how are we going to teach it to kids when they want to go out and think for themselves and think introspectively? So I would call on the local school department to really look internally, to understand, is there some component of what we're doing that is creating this problem or making it worse or not solving it, whereas those other schools around us are solving it at a much lower cost?
Well, in a way, I think it might be a little bit of perspective where they think, since they're educators, they know what to do, okay, and we don't. Well, but I think many of us have been fairly successful in business, so we ran organizations that were people-driven.
Yes.
So we knew how we worked. We adapted to whatever group we had, and responded to their needs to make them more effective in the organization.
I think you raise a very good point. That's one of the distinctives between the charter schools and regular public schools. Regular public schools are required. Every teacher needs to be licensed, a licensed teacher licensed by the state to teach. In the charter schools, it's half of the teachers Only half. Now, there are those in the Board of Aldermen when I was sitting there who would say, well, they only half their teachers are licensed.
Yeah.
But the other half of their teachers are industry experts. So you would have someone who's focused, who has built a career
Right.
focused on customer service, for
Right.
instance, teaching about marketing, let's say, in those schools. And you might have an engineer teaching engineering, not someone who has learned about teaching engineering. So again, the model, I think, of taking half the teachers who are licensed teachers, that's good. Licensing does something good for them, I'm sure. And then the other half who are proven business leaders, teaching some of those courses rather than just one mindset. I think you're going to more likely lead down a road to success.
Sure. There's no reason why they can't take people who finished with their career and would like to do a little teaching with the
Exactly.
students.
I think it's a great thing to do.
Yeah, they ought to be
And-
looking for some people like that.
They ought to be looking for people like that because those people, I think, are going to bring an industry perspective, a real world perspective that will help this student
Hmm.
advance and be a contributor in society after they graduate.
Well, then, one of the other things that I think maybe the micro society is doing a good job at is teaching people, children at that age, how to get along with the different interactions that you have to
That's
do
right.
if you're running a family or anything like that.
That's right.
How to use banking, how to use this, that service, or that service.
We used to call that home economics when I was in school.
Well, yeah, you had that, but not everybody had home economics either. But I mean, I think what they've done is they've had a little bit of time where they spend just like they're adults and running a family in a city or town.
Yeah, they have a chance to try on different roles. Someone can be a banker in the town, and they will be lending money to other students who come in. Not real money, of course. It's all fictional, but it's a chance to understand what lending is about. And the other child coming in might be an entrepreneur, and he's going to start some new business.
Right.
And so they make their deal, and then there's others who might be a customer for that new business. And then in the next unit or month or whenever the time frame changes, the person who was the entrepreneur might now be the banker, and the person who was the customer might now be the business owner, and they change these roles. And that's where the term micro society, they're working this little society amongst their
And this compares to
Fellow students.
regular education as it's being given now, where they get very little experience in some of those things. I was just talking to a woman today who was complaining, well, not complaining, but just commenting on her son who had grown up now, was on his own. And after the first year, he was buying a new car, and he says, "Mom, what do you think? They've offered me a loan at 6.5%. And she says, "What?
yeah.
You taking a loan? It's you know what that means? You're paying an interest."
Yeah.
He never thought about that, and then
Right.
she found out, looking into it, he was having a checking account that very frequently went over the limit, and he had to pay for the coverage, I guess you call it. And he said, she said that he had over $1,000 in these payments in the first year.
Oh my goodness.
And he just didn't know what that was,
Did that student graduate from Nashua
Yeah,
Public Schools?
yeah.
Well, again, these kids need to be equipped. That's the whole idea.
That's right.
And it
They
sounds
don't-
like he's got a job, so
Yeah.
he's working. He's going to buy a car. He knows he can
Right.
take care of himself.
Right.
But some of these basics are completely foreign to him,
Uh-huh.
and they should not have been foreign to him. I think someone who maybe goes to the Micro Society Academy or
Yeah,
Academy for Science and Design might not have that problem.
right.
So hopefully his mom's going to teach him. But the school could have done something with that.
Yeah, and the other thing is interest on credit cards. What is it, 18%, 20% in
It's
some places?
astronomical. Yeah.
And people just keep it on there. If you don't pay it off in 30 days, guys, you're stupid.
Well, it's going to cost you way more. So
That's
if you
right.
spend $100, it's going to, if you make those payments, the minimum
Right.
payments are going to cost you $200 for the $100 you spent. That's a big penalty to pay.
Yeah. So anyway, maybe the superintendent has this plan that he has for implementing a new way of doing things, but I haven't heard anything on it.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. I think that they say the proof is in the pudding. We'll see if there's
Yeah.
ever any change. But like I said before, I don't think there's any accountability.
Right.
If something doesn't work, there will be no accountability for it. And if next year we're still in the bottom third, and the year after that we're still in the bottom third, and 10 years from now we're still in the bottom third and still losing students, there won't be any accountability. And that's a problem, I think.
I think that kind of brings up the topic of municipal elections that are coming up this fall, because the school board is elected by folks in the audience, people like ourselves. Aldermen are elected by the citizens in the off years. And the people who are elected have a major role in these policies.
Yes.
And I think we need to think a lot harder about, really what's happening in Nashua. We had a disappointing election for a special election on a vacant seat. And Fred T. Boone, who was a experienced alderman, ran against another experienced alderman, Ben Clemens, and the Democrat Clemens won by 2-1 margin.
And the turnout was very low.
And low turnout, yeah.
Well, I think people, our audience, if you're interested, get in touch with us. We're the Republican Party that meets second and Thursday of every month over in the Doubletree in the new, no, I guess we're meeting in the Marriott.
Marriott Courtyard.
Yeah, Marriott Courtyard now. And we'll talk about it. You'll find out that there's a way of joining the new voters that are coming out. So think about it out there. Be in mind of the civic need for people who want to do something and set it right.
Yes, it's very, very important. And these municipal elections are really key. I think that the decisions that are made by the Board of Aldermen probably have a greater impact on the day-to-day lives of folks here in Nashua than maybe some of the decision up in Concord. We talked about Bill 686, for instance. This is going to have a big effect, but it may take a little while for it to be felt and these kinds of things. But things that are happening in Nashua are much more current. Yep. We had a revaluation recently, and many folks' tax bills went up. And it looks like there's some discussion about what's going to happen with assessments. The assessing department is going to come under some new leadership, and the city may go back and take a look at everybody's property.
Well, that's what they say they're going to do.
That's what they said they're going to do.
Because there hasn't been a review in a long time.
No, that's true. But these decisions are made by the Board of Aldermen and by our elected leaders. And we need to really be careful. I saw a piece of news, I think it was today or yesterday. There's a measure that's coming before the Board of Aldermen that would allow, if I'm not misunderstanding it, in the case of a vacancy like we had recently when sadly Alderman McCarthy passed away, which was prompting the need for the special election. If there's a vacancy in a board, this new ordinance would allow the remaining members of that board to choose their own person to come in.
That's one way of looking at it, or even appointing it by the mayor or something.
Yes, I think elections are good.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want. I think that this Board of Aldermen would have chosen Ben Clemens.
Yeah.
They certainly indicated that when they, prior to the election, were saying, we're so glad Ben's going to be back on the board. They were considering it a done deal. That's what they would have done. But I still think that the power to choose these people, because they have such a huge impact on our daily lives, that power needs to rest with the voters. And if turnout is low, well, then no one can be blamed but the voter if they don't like the outcome.
Yeah, we should talk about the nature of the Alderman board. So we have 9 wards. We have one Alderman for each ward.
Yes.
And that's a 2-year term. Then we also have the Alderman at large, Dave, and that's a 4-year term.
Yep, there's 6 Aldermen at large. It's a 4-year term. And the Alderman at large, because there's a municipal election every 2 years. So every 2 years, half of those 6, 3, are going to be up for election, and the other 3. And that's designed to prevent a complete turnover of the board. Because it's possible that you could have 3 new Aldermen at large and 9 brand new Aldermen. So 12 of the 15 could be brand new, and you don't want to have 15 of 15 being brand new.
For the folks in the audience who might be thinking of running for a civic position like an alderman, you've been an alderman, Dave. Why don't you talk a little bit about the responsibilities, the time commitments, for someone who might consider that elected position?
Well, it certainly does take time. I will say that most of the activities on the Board of Aldermen are conducted in the evenings. Meetings are in the evenings, unlike in Concord, meetings are in the day. Meetings are in the evenings, so most of us will be doing some kind of work during the day, maybe part-time, full-time, but we'll still have a job and family responsibilities, and then have these meetings in the evenings. And the amount of time that is spent, well, I guess that's up to the individual. I think it's important to spend time doing your due diligence. You need to show up in a meeting and know what's on the agenda, know where you stand on the issues, know what the implications of the various pieces of legislation are, so that you can discuss them intelligently. You don't want to show up, listen to the conversation, and as if you're hearing it for the first time. That's not fair to the voters who have put you in that office. I will say, too, there's a stipend. That's $5,000 per year for an alderman. And I think that it's not an income, it's not a job at $5,000 a year. But it's a stipend. I think the voters approve that kind of thing because their expectation is that you will show up and be prepared. And if you're assigned to a committee, you will go to the committee meetings and you will take constituent calls. A big part of the job of an alderman is to respond to constituents. We get phone calls. There are those aldermen who will tell you, I got 100 calls on this issue. No, he didn't. You got 5. And 5 is a lot because, sometimes people don't reach out, but people do get in touch with you for all kinds of things.
Especially if you're responsive.
Especially if you're responsive and responsible. My trash didn't get picked up. The plow left a big berm of snow in front of my driveway. You hear this kind of thing, or I've got a pothole in the street. And that's a lot of what an alderman does, is this constituent services. And I think it's a very, very important role because if they're frustrated, you can tell when you pick up the phone, they're frustrated. They were expecting voicemail, or they weren't expecting a phone call back, and you call them back in 15 minutes, and they're surprised. And as soon as they're surprised that you're responsive, their anger goes down. It goes down. And in the end, my goal when I was an alderman was to make the people that I interacted with say to themselves at the end of the day, you know what? I'm glad I live in Nashua. It's just really a feeling. Yeah. You want someone to say, my life is good, and it's good because I'm here in Nashua. And that's very soft. But still, it makes a huge impact on the person's sleep that night, maybe, and how they're going to react the next day, and where they're going to kick the dog on the way out of the house in the morning, right? We don't want them kicking their dogs. We want them being happy here. And so I think a really big part is the responsiveness and the tone that we exhibit when we talk to members of the public. Are we respectful or not? I attended when Kelly Ayotte was still a senator. I went to a town hall that she had. I was not in office yet. I was thinking about running. I wanted to hear, kind of just see what they did. And I went to a town hall that Jeanne Shaheen had. And we can use their names because these were public meetings. And the meetings were about 2 weeks apart. And the same gentleman, some of the same people were at both, but there was one who stood up in Kelly Ayotte's meeting, and he had an issue and he was mad. And Senator Ayotte listened, nodded her head, and said, I think you're right. I think you have a point. And the guy's anger went down, and they had a discussion. I thought, wow, she did that pretty well. I went to Senator Shaheen's event a couple weeks later. The same guy was there, and I saw him stand up. I thought, uh-oh, here's the same guy. I was expecting the same kind of thing. He stood up, and he was mad. And Senator Shaheen stuck her hand up. Not my problem. This is you, sir. You're out of line. This kind of response. And I thought, holy cow. And of course, he escalated. Yeah. He ultimately stormed out. Maybe the guard came and took him out with us over at the community college a number of years ago. So 6 years ago by now. But I was really amazed at the similarity but the difference in responses and the resulting difference in reaction and tone of the meeting. So the same question, the same anger, you can handle it well or poorly. And Senator Ayotte handled it very, very well. And I thought to myself, that's how I want to do it if I'm in that situation. So if someone's got a problem with a pothole or a stop sign or whatever, listen to them and do your best to respond. So anyone who's thinking about doing it should understand that it does take time. Some of that time is certainly devoted to meetings. Budget time, I was on a budget committee. Those meetings would start at 7, they might get out at 10. You're there a long time, and you're making critical decisions. So you can get tired, but you have to put the time in for the meetings. You have to put the time in ahead of time so that you know what's going to be discussed. And you got to pick up the phone and help people navigate City Hall. I think our City Hall employees are great. If I referred someone to a particular department, they would go to that department and they would get good service. And I would hear back later, I talked to so-and-so like you told me to, and it was great. They were very helpful. These are the kinds of things we have to do. Very, very important. So we should never lose sight of the fact that public service is public service. It's service to the public. And this is what's done. It's not really about, I want to get elected to help the mayor's agenda. I want to get elected because I'm a D, not an R, and I can't stand Trump. I'm gonna make a statement to Trump. If I'm elected, I'm gonna make a statement to Trump. That's a waste of time, and it's disservice to the folks at home. So we don't want to act that. We don't want people, I think, in office who are going to take that kind of position. We want them to be responsible.
Well, we're coming up with some very important things in the town. I mean, this election is going to be more than just how to run the city, because you got another financial question coming up. How much money are we going to spend in fixing a school?
Yes.
And are we going to have a entertainment area? There's two big things that you could well over $100 million of bonding is going to go through.
That's right.
And you got to look at some of the other problems with the buildings, because we've had those too, and they're significant problems. So you might have $200 million that you're going to have to bond.
Yes.
And what do we do? How do we do it? And do we want to do that building for the Arts Center? Or do we want to take Elm Street and use part of that building and build a new middle school? Those things have to be decided, and the aldermen are going to play a big part in it. And we ought to get people in there who have experience in doing something like that. And it's, again, I don't want to dwell on this too much, but you got to get somebody with business experience, somebody who has the experience of being responsible for a multi-million-dollar decision.
That's right. And knowing that even though we talked about accountability, no one's going to hold you really accountable. But you still have to hold yourself accountable for making a decision that's going to be in the best interest of Nashua. I was talking with a gentleman a couple months ago, maybe a month and a half ago, he was comparing Nashua. He doesn't live in Nashua. He was comparing Nashua, though, to other cities in the state. He says, what is going on in Nashua? Nashua, it's the second largest city in the state. It just never seems to really have its identity. Portsmouth knows what it wants to be, and Manchester knows what it wants to be, and Concord does, and Keene does, and these other towns, they know what they want to be, but Nashua seems to do this thing here and that thing there, and there's no cohesion in at least to this gentleman who's on the outside. He says, I don't see a cohesive vision for Nashua. And as an alderman, as someone who's lived here certainly for a while, I have to say I tend to kind of agree. What are we doing? What are we going to do with that school? And how does that affect the vision for Nashua? We have a declining enrollment, a school that needs a lot of work, and is it best to invest in that school again, or to build something else elsewhere? We talk about the Arts Center. We have the symphony here. It's the New Hampshire. It's a state symphony. It's not a Nashua symphony, but it's in Nashua, and it's wonderful. And they sell a lot of tickets. Those seats are full, and it's at the Keefe Auditorium at Elm Street Middle School. And my wife and I went in the last performance. It was great, and we want to preserve that because that's an image that Nashua presents, not just in New Hampshire, but in the New England area. Really, this is a very, very good symphony. It's not low class symphony. It's very, very good, and we want to make sure that we cultivate that. The Arts Center on the other side, the shoe store one, I'm not sure where that's really going to go, and yet we're doubling down on it, and that should really be kind of taken off on its own now, but it doesn't appear to be. I saw an article in the paper too. Maybe it was yesterday. Maybe it was today. I get today and yesterday a little mixed up, but it's talking about the Rex Theater in Manchester, and the Rex Theater is being run by the same gentleman who runs the the other one in Manchester.
The Palace.
The Palace, yes. And he came in and he spoke here in Nashua too. I think I went to the Board of Aldermen meetings when I wasn't there, after I was out of office. But this is someone who knows how to run an art center and who has experience and he has a plan, and he's raised the money through a loan that he plans to pay back. And, that project is moving forward very, very quickly. This art center in Nashua has been talked about for 16 or 17 or 18 years. Why is it going so slow? What's the matter with the plan? If there's a good plan like we've seen in Manchester, the dominoes fall into place and it works quickly. Not this long, protracted delay and all this controversy and a vote before the people.
They do a poor job of selling some of their projects. I think they don't communicate very well as what they want. They don't form a good objective and how I'm going to get there. It is always still developing. Changes are still being made.
Right.
Can't you make up your mind of what you want to do?
Well, we need folks who are going to run for the Board of
That's
Aldermen, who can step in there and really help bring some of that common sense, to that kind of common sense approach to the equation. I look at these things that are done, whether it's the Elm Street School or the Arts Center or the Burke Street property, and the decisions that are being made. As someone who was inside, now someone who's observing, I have to say that they're not the best business decisions that are being made. They're political decisions. And I know that politics, you're not going to escape it. Politics exists. We're supposed to escape it here to some extent because this is nonpartisan.
Right.
So you don't run as a Democrat or Republican. And we should conduct ourselves appropriately too, which I think many of us on the board always did, not everyone. But we take an intensely political approach to these things, where someone digs in and says, "This is the idea, and we're going to push it, and I don't care what happens. We're gonna do it." And you end up doing things for an ego gain that end up not being suitable in the marketplace, and that's the problem I think that Nashua is facing. That's why this gentleman observed that I referred to. That observed that there doesn't appear to be a cohesive image for Nashua, and that's because I think that we take too often too political an approach to our problems and not a kind of practical approach to our problems.
Yeah, there's a tinge of, we have one person or a small group of people with an idea, and it's their idea that's going to work.
Right.
You don't open yourselves to other suggestions or
That's right.
how to even do what you want to do. The methodology is very important to get the support. If you don't go out and communicate what you're doing, how people aren't going to be ready to pay more money for whatever you're doing.
Right.
Because
part of that communication involves listening carefully. And I think that some of the town hall meetings that I went to, there was a lot of, this is what we're going to do, this is what we're going to do, this is what we're going to do. Not, well, what do you think we should do? And I think it's very important, whoever runs for these positions needs to take the approach that they're going to listen to what the taxpayer says, because they're the ones who are paying the bills. We don't want them to leave like they're leaving from New York State. We don't want to chase people out of the city. And if we listen to people, convince them, get them to believe in their own heart that they're glad they live in Nashua. And I think that's because we listen to them, we're going to be better off. And that's who we want in these offices.
And I hope some of our listeners feels that applies to them, because we could really use some help.
We could.
So come to our meeting if you're listening now, and it's on YouTube, and our meeting is tomorrow night. And it'll be interesting, but the second Thursday of every month. And you can go to NashuaGOP.org and see what the National Republican Club has to offer.
I think, too, that people should stay tuning into the show.
Yeah.
I think that they should
tell your friends.
Tell your friends, because where else do you hear people talking about this? And I think we try to take an approach that really hopes to inform the people at home about what's being discussed and what the impact of these decisions can have on their lives. And we're not preaching. We're saying this is what's going on, and we encourage people to call in or to send us emails, answer their questions on the show, and to let us know what they're thinking, because it's about having an informed voting public. That's really key.
Bill, you have anything else to add?
No, it's a great conversation.
Yeah.
And I hope we can get a few folks inspired to help us all out.
Well, every week now we'll be doing this for the coming months, as long as we have topics to discuss, I guess, which I don't think we'll ever run out of that.
There's no shortage of foolishness going up in Concord and trickling down to Nashua.
Yes.
So we're happy to present what's happening that
Right.
might be of interest and give our perspective on it.
And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
all I'm going to say, if you've missed some of the previous discussions that we've had, you can go to the website that I said, NashuaGOP.org, where you can go through the archives of earlier shows.
I think we can give a little preview too for some of the things that we haven't had a chance to talk about today. There was a headline in today's paper about recycling. Recycling in Nashua. We've blown that budget. China has had a history of taking all of this recycled material and doing whatever they do with it, but they're pushing back on it. They don't want to take it. So now it's going to cost more to dispose of the recycled material. And my understanding is it's about $180,000 right now.
Right.
That's what was in today's paper. This sort of ties into the whole question of our environment and the Green New Deal. We haven't really touched on that too much. That's big news. It's being discussed all the time. There's a gentleman by the name of Patrick Moore who we want to talk about at some stage. He's come out and he's been very vocal. He was one of the co-founders of Greenpeace. Been very vocal about some of the flaws in some of the environmental stuff, and actually very vocal about the Green New Deal and how detrimental that could be. Now, I'm not a scientist. I think the jury is still out. We don't know what's going to happen, but it's important that we consider the various viewpoints, because if we don't consider various viewpoints, we just buy one approach, we're going to, again, make an uninformed political decision where we should make an informed decision on some of these things. So these are some things that are being discussed all the time, and I think we should touch on them in the
Definitely. They'll be coming up.
future. Good.
So tune in. People's view is your view. Thank you very much for listening.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.